you, like myself, are a product of Canadian universities. These are the hallowed halls of Canadian academia that have produced people like you and doctors and lawyers and nurses and teachers. And until recently, they've been respected halls of learning, but now they seem to be the focal point of political activism that has the flavor of NGOs, of people outside the country, causing this. When I look at what's going on at Columbia University and places like McGill, I can't help but notice that they all have the same tents and that the signs look very similar to the ones that were used during the BLM riots. So, what's your take on what's going on at universities in North America right now with the pro Palestinian sort of encampments taking over these campuses?
I think it's a confluence of so many different things. So, on the one hand, universities have always been unhinged in the sense that, like, the kids that are there are typically not the ones that are paying their own tuition.
Right.
So they start doing stupid things, and I can't remember the names, but this has happened a lot in U.S. history at different universities where they've
Hmm.
had sit-ins. I remember when I was at York University, I was a student. I'm left of center, socialist lunatic as I was at the time. So you adopt an anti-Israel posture. And I'd like to stress this is not because you hate Jews. I mean, you get Noam Chomsky coming on campus, and as long as he takes an anti-Israeli stance, you're like,
Right.
oh wow, this guy's on our side. Same with Norman Finkelstein.
Hmm.
Um, so that's one thing. These kids aren't paying their own tuition, and then you add this is throwing like gasoline on a dumpster fire, which you mentioned these NGOs. So they're wholly ungodly. They're coming in and they're meddling in affairs that they shouldn't do. Many of the times they're using taxpayer money, or you get someone like George Soros. So that's another problem. In addition to that, you have a third problem is that these universities, they're losing public support. Like if they're pushing
Hmm.
racism, if they're pushing, you know, maybe not transgenderism for children, but like if they're pursuing these socialist agendas that we don't agree with, well, I'm less likely to stand up for that university when protesters take it over. That you got to do a cost benefit analysis because they're attacking people based on their religion. That's an issue.
Hmm.
And then a fourth problem, I'm gonna invoke the party argument here, where I think a lot of these problems would evaporate if we privatize these institutions. I
Amen.
know,
Yes.
yeah, I know that's like I'm labeling myself a heretic in Canada by using the P word, but if we had private universities, they would have private security, and if we had castle doctrine, I'm not saying shoot the students, but you can go up to
Right.
them, you can detain them, you
Hmm.
can identify them, the ones that are students, you can expel them, and the ones that are not, hand them to the police. And if we had a judicial system that wasn't completely captured, then they would prosecute them or pursue that in court.
Hmm.
That's a lot of ifs, but I'll stop right there.
Yeah. Well, I noticed that in New York, in New York at Columbia, that the police are actually going in or are breaking up these encampments. I doubt that that's going to happen in Canada, places like McGill and UBC. I'm curious to know, though, it's been said that anti Semitism is something of a bellwether, that perhaps something is rotten in the state of Denmark. In other words, that perhaps the social fabric of a country is coming apart. What's the central role of anti Semitism in all of this? What are your thoughts on that?
So I don't know the history that well to take it back. Like maybe, I mean, it's my understanding that anti-Semitism comes from Christianity and the rift between the two, and obviously it exploded in Nazi Germany. So I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I have a feeling that this is not about the fact that they're Jewish.
Right.
Um, if tomorrow Israel came out and said we're disbanding the IDF, we're going to have a two-state solution. We're going to lean into climate change, and we're going to change our flag to the trans flag. I think like anti-Semitism would just evaporate instantly.
Yeah.
Um, I will also add that all of these things, they all fall under the umbrella of prejudice. So what you're seeing right now is there's a massive push in the media and in government to go after the elderly. They're
Hmm.
calling them boomers, and they're saying, oh, they're the reason the property value is so high is because they bought these lands a long time ago. So we should increase taxes to bankrupt essentially these people and take away their ability to live because this is what they were hoping on to retire. that's another form of prejudice. The assault on white people, again, another form of prejudice. Like, it's not. Somebody better than me will probably say, "Payment, it's Marxism," but my point is, I think we have a bigger, deeper problem.
I agree. And part of the response to this on the right seems to be a movement towards Christianity. For example, Tucker Carlson recently has come out and has basically pronounced that he thinks that what we're really battling here is not left versus right. It's not politics. It's religious, and it's principalities and powers. We're actually battling evil. Russell Brand has come out on his podcast, and apparently he was recently baptized in the Thames and was reciting the Rosary on his podcast. Jordan Peterson, his wife, recently converted to Christianity. Do you see a connection here in terms of the somewhat public revival of Christianity in the West? Do you see a connection there between the rise of for example, anti-Semitism on the left and also atheism?
Yeah, so let me go back a little bit. I was born in Iran, so I guess as per Islamic law, I was born Muslim. And then after the religious clergy destroyed the country, our family just became wholly secular. And I've pretty much been
Hmm.
secular and atheist all my life. And
Hmm.
then until 2020, and I'm going to these protests, I I swear to God, about 90-95% of these protests came from Christians.
Yeah.
And so there's something there that's it's almost entirely the Christian movement that's stepping up and trying to save the country.
Hmm.
And I agree with you. Tucker's been vocal on this, but Russell Brand, I think I really like his view, and he's basically he tied it back to the land. Um,
Interesting.
like he said, we've lost touch with the land. Like, we don't know what he meant was, we don't know where the food comes from. Like, we
Mhm.
don't understand this concept of property rights. And I can't help but feel that Christianity is somehow related to that, because you can't separate Christianity in the West and this whole concept of classical liberalism, or the right for property rights and things.
Fascinating. So let's tie that into some of the policies that you support as a PPC candidate. And just to confirm, it is your intention to run as a candidate for the PPC in the next federal election, correct?
Yeah, unless they kick me out for my views being too extreme.
Well,
Oh.
let's hope they don't, because I certainly, if I were in your writing, I would certainly vote for you. One of them that's very, very topical right now in Canada and is inflation. And you state on your website you believe that money is the measuring tape for value, and inflation constantly distorts that tape. So what do you mean by that, and what is your policy in terms of inflation?
So I actually stole that from Vivek Ramaswamy, and he's got a good point. Like, inflation, so you got a measuring tape that's for the physical world. Like, you measure how many centimeters it is. That tape can't be made out of gum or silly putty. Otherwise, like, no architectural building would work. And it's sort of the same thing with finance, business, life. You can't measure it based on length, width, or height, but you can measure a value of something using money.
Hmm.
Traditionally, that has been gold, but now it's been switched with the US dollar.
Right.
Um, and like, obviously, since I think it was 1971, Bretton Woods got ripped up and they started floating their currency, we started getting more inflation, but things have gotten out of control in the last few years. And I want to tie this back to Iran. The number one complaint I get from my friends in Iran when I talk to them is there's no certainty. So if they buy a car today, and they want to flip it, they buy it for 10,000 today. Tomorrow it might be 75,000. It might be $3.
Hmm.
There's no certainty in the fundamental underlying issue, transaction unit, which is money.
Hmm.
And that's happening here too. And what's happening is, people want to hedge. They want to hedge inflation. They can go buy property. It drives up the price of property. That's a problem. You can go buy gold. Gold is not a really good hedge on inflation. You can go buy crypto. That's got its own issues. So people I think they're dumping their money either in property or in the stock market. When instead, money should just be a medium for people living their lives rather than living in fear.
Hmm. It's funny you talk about hedging. A friend of mine is one of the top hedge fund managers in Western Canada. He was telling me recently that another thing that's being hedged are carbon credits. And in fact, that the carbon tax is a driver of these carbon credits, and that there's basically speculation in them, and that many billions of dollars are being made off the back of carbon taxes, which of course are directly related to a rise in inflation. But very wealthy people who can afford to do so are actually speculating on this carbon tax market. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, the vaguely familiar. So the former or current presidential candidate, Dr. Shiva, he's got a good video up on BitChute about this. But it's my understanding that the carbon credits, they're going to be mediated by the UN. So you purchase these credits based on how much carbon you produce. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
And you have charlatans like Al Gore that are going up and they're buying this. So it's a huge conflict of interest because he's hoarded all these carbon credits. Now he's pushing policy to make himself rich. It takes me back to something Bruce Party said. Like the problem is not these things are a problem. Like Al Gore purchasing these carbon credits, the carbon credits, this is all a problem. But it wouldn't be a problem if we had limited government. Like we're
Right.
giving government the power to regulate these things, and almost all across the board, every time a government gets involved, they just end up messing things up. And this is a
Hmm.
perfect example.
Yeah, they're very good at that. They've also made a mess of education, and this is another thing that you talk about on your website. How the PPC policy and your policy in education calls for important changes. You say that the transfer of decision making of educational curricula from the community, from families to the provincial government, is an abdication of parental responsibility. What do you mean by that? And what changes would you make if you were a member of parliament to our educational system?
So I compare it to like we have this habit in Canada where if something happens, you call the police.
Yeah,
Well, if the house blows up or if somebody's firing a gun in your neighborhood, that makes sense. You call in the experts. But if somebody is assaulting your wife physically or verbally, you're not supposed to wait for the police. You're supposed to, beat the guy up. But you
sure.
you can't do that now because that's considered assault and they'll send you to jail and there's so much societal pressure to call the police. They're like
Hmm.
our Ghostbusters. That's what I
Hmm.
mean when I say abdication of responsibility. So when you
Right.
transfer responsibility to the police, you've abdicated your responsibility. When you transfer responsibility to the government, local government, then provincial government, as a parent, for the education system, that's an abdication of responsibility. We can't then turn around and be like, why are they teaching this filth in school? I don't understand. Well, we have let power drift from the municipalities. When you lived in a city and you could deal with the school board, you dealt with the principal, you could tell them, like, we don't want this. And the principal would
Hmm.
listen. When that power drifts to the provincial legislature, it's a lot harder. The problems are going farther and farther away from your immediate community. And the reason I said that is there was a protest in Vancouver. I forget the gentleman's name, but he's running as an independent for provincial office, and they were attacking the content of what they were teaching in school. And I'm like, you're going about it the wrong way. The problem is that we're allowing them to tax us. The money goes to the provincial government, and then we have to claw it back with conditions. Like
Yeah.
that's where you have to start reforming the system.
Yeah, and this is central to the PPC platform, isn't it? The grassroots engagement with our communities, and thereby to politics. And just as an aside, a little anecdote: I was at a talk recently, and there's a gentleman named David Parker who heads up something called Take Back Alberta in our province. And he was speaking in front of a group of people, and he said, show of hands, how many of you object to the types of books that are in our school libraries? And all the hands went up. And then he asked, okay, now show of hands, how many of you are serving on a school library board? No hands went up. And this is kind of the essential problem, isn't it? That when I mean, in Canada, we're fortunate in that we do have a country where it is still possible to engage with our communities and become involved in quote unquote politics, at least the ones that are closest to our door, and perhaps even into federal and provincial politics. Well, you're doing it, aren't you? But not enough of us are doing it, and not enough of us are doing it for the right reasons. And we don't have enough people like you there to crowd out all the people who want to come in and really do all the bad stuff. That's part of the problem. That's part of the platform that the PPC advocates, isn't it?
Yes, and David Parker, he's really a saint. Like what he did to save Alberta. So I'm
Hmm.
hoping to do 1% of that. But he is absolutely right, and it ties back to what you asked about Christianity and the revival of Christianity. What's happened is we've destroyed the family unit. We've destroyed the concept of community, which community faith, sort of the same thing, and we're living a consumption based lifestyle. So I don't know if I'm a product. I'm very much a product of the big urban centers. I grew up in Vancouver, so I know how things work there. So you go in there, and feminism has told women they have to go get a career, and society's told men, just go out, get drunk, and hook up. So that is a consumption based lifestyle because you're not
Right.
investing anything, you're not earning money, and
Hmm.
any benefits that come out of from these high paying jobs in these cities, they just go right back into nightclubs, expensive restaurants. So it's a big problem, and what I've noticed this because I've been following the quote unquote freedom movement.
Hmm.
They come on and they talk about whatever 15-minute cities or whatever their core competency is, and then they turn to the people and they say, "All right, guys, time to get involved." But people look at the problem and they're like, "This is larger than life. I don't know where to get involved." So
Hmm.
we almost have to hold their hand, and I that's my goal. I'm going to be starting a virtual town hall Zoom meeting weekly, but I
Oh,
think what we have to start
great.
telling people is one really easy place to start is go on your town hall city council website, figure out what the city council meeting is going to be talking about, read it. It's going to be a 100-page PDF, but read it, and then go to every single meeting, and just listen or ask a question. That's how you blossom into becoming a politician. And I think
Hmm.
yes, I'm running for the PPC, and we're going to do good things. But I think the only way we can take back our country is to use a term they employ against them, a whole of society approach. I think
Right.
we have to rush all of these offices.
Hmm.